Welcome to Crimson Legacy Historians, where the past is not just remembered, but brought back to life with depth and clarity. You're about to witness one of history's most calculated acts of psychological warfare. For 76 days, they didn't just imprison Marie Antoinette, they systematically dismantled her humanity piece by piece. And it all started with an 8-year-old boy. Forget everything you think you know about the guillotine, the blade that was mercy. What came before was something far darker. They discovered her one vulnerability, and they exploited it with a cruelty that still haunts the historical record today. This is the story of Prisoner 280, and I'm going to show you exactly what they did to her. It's July 3rd, 1793, middle of the night, the Temple prison in Paris. You hear boots echoing down stone corridors. Heavy, purposeful, getting closer. Marie Antoinette is sleeping beside her 8-year-old son, Louis Charles. Her hand rests on his chest. She hasn't let him out of her sight since they executed his father 6 months ago. The door explodes open. 6 guards flood the room holding a document, an order. They've come for the boy. What happens next will echo through those prison walls for an entire hour. A former queen transforms into something primal. A mother fighting for her child with every ounce of strength she has left. She throws her body against the door. She screams until her voice breaks. She begs them to take her instead. But here's what makes this moment so much worse. This isn't random violence. This isn't chaos. This is calculated, because the revolutionaries have realized something crucial. They can't break Marie Antoinette with torture, starvation, or humiliation, but they can break her with her own love. And they're about to use her son to destroy her in ways that will make the guillotine feel like an afterthought. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal gets so much darker than you can imagine. Before we confront the horrors ahead, you need to understand who Marie Antoinette actually was, because the woman they tortured in 1793 was nothing like the caricature the revolutionaries created. She was born Maria Antonia in Vienna 1755, an Austrian archduchess and the youngest daughter of Empress Maria Theresa. At 14 years old, she was married off to the future King Louis V, 16th of France. This wasn't love. This was geopolitics. Austria and France needed an alliance, and she was the price. The French court despised her from day one. She was Austrian, which meant she was the enemy. She was young, awkward, and didn't understand French customs. The courtiers mocked her accent, her clothing, her every move. Even her own husband ignored her for years. Their marriage wasn't consummated until 7 years in, a humiliation that became public gossip across Europe. So she did what any isolated young woman might do. She escaped into pleasure, elaborate hairstyles, expensive gowns, parties at her private retreat. The Petit Trianon, the French people, starving and desperate, saw these extravagances and branded her Madame Deficit. Did she actually say, "Let them eat cake," when told the people had no bread? No, that's propaganda. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. By the time the revolution erupted in 1789, Marie Antoinette had become France's most convenient scapegoat. She wasn't a monster. She was a foreigner, a woman, and a queen. 3 things that made her the perfect target. And when the monarchy fell, the revolutionaries needed someone to blame for centuries of royal excess. They chose her. But here's the crucial detail. By 1793, Marie Antoinette wasn't the frivolous party girl anymore. She was a mother of 4 who'd watched her oldest son die of tuberculosis at age 7. She'd seen her husband dragged to the guillotine. She'd spent months locked in the Temple prison with her surviving children, knowing any day could be their last. She'd already lost everything. Her crown, her freedom, her husband, her country. The revolutionaries were about to teach her that she could still lose more. Let me paint you a picture of the Temple prison, because this place was designed to break people long before they ever reached the guillotine. It was a medieval fortress in Paris originally built by the Knights Templar. Dark, damp, oppressive. After King Louis V, 16th was executed in January 1793, Marie Antoinette, and her two surviving children, 14-year-old Marita and 8-year-old Louis Charles, were locked in a tower, guarded day and night. At first, they were kept together. Marouinette tried to maintain some semblance of normal life for her children. She taught them lessons. She prayed with them. She held them close at night when the sounds of revolutionary mobs echoed through the streets outside. But the guards were watching, always watching, taking notes, reporting back to the Committee of Public Safety, the revolutionary government that now controlled France. And they noticed something. Marie Antoinette could endure anything except threats to her children. So they started experimenting with psychological torture. First, they restricted access to the children's rooms, forcing Marie Antoinette to beg for permission to see her own son and daughter. Then, they installed additional guards inside their quarters. Men who sat in the corner staring, recording everything, every conversation, every moment of affection, every tear. The children weren't allowed to speak German, their mother's native language. They had to use French exclusively, which meant even their private family moments were monitored and controlled by the state. Marie Antoinette started to unravel. Her hair, which had been light brown, began turning white from stress, a condition called Marie Antoinette syndrome, which is actually a real medical phenomenon. She stopped eating. She developed hemorrhaging that she tried desperately to hide from the guards. But she held on because she still had her children. The revolutionaries knew they needed to take that away from her. July 3, 1793, the date that would define Marie Antoinette's final torment. Let me walk you through what happened that night, because the primary sources, the actual testimony of people who were there, are absolutely devastating. It's around 10 p.m. Marie Antoinette has just put 8-year-old Louis Charles to bed. He's sleeping in the same room. She hasn't let him out of her sight since his father's execution. Her daughter, Marie C., and her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, are in adjacent rooms. Then they hear it, boots, multiple men coming up the tower stairs. The door bangs open. 6 municipal guards led by a man carrying an official decree from the Committee of Public Safety. They've come to take Louis Charles away. He's to be re-educated by the Republic, separated from his mother's corrupting influence. Marita Thers later wrote about this moment in her memoir. She described how her mother went from composed to feral. In an instant, Marie Antoinette threw herself between the guards and her sleeping son. She grabbed Louis Charles and held him so tightly that he woke up crying, confused, and then she started screaming. Not the elegant objections of a former queen, raw animalistic screaming. "You will not take him. You will have to kill me first. He is just a child." The guards tried to reason with her. The order came from the highest authority. She had no choice. She didn't care. For 1 full hour, 60 minutes, she physically blocked the doorway, holding her son, refusing to let them pass. The guards threatened her. They threatened Ned the boy. They threatened her daughter. They said if she didn't comply, they would use force and people would get hurt. Marie Antoinette kept fighting. Finally, Madame Elizabeth begged her sister-in-law to stop. The boy was sobbing, terrified. Marita was hysterical, and the guards were getting violent. Marie Antoinette's resistance broke. She kissed Louis Charles one final time. She whispered something in his ear. "We'll never know what." And then she watched as 6 grown men dragged her 8-year-old son down the tower stairs, his screams echoing until they faded into silence. She collapsed on the floor and didn't move for hours. But here's where it gets truly evil. The revolutionaries didn't just take her son. They gave him to a man named Antoine Song, a radical cobbler specifically chosen to destroy the boy. And Simon's methods were horrifying. Louis Charles was locked in a dark, windowless room. He was forced to wear a red revolutionary cap and sing anti-monarchist songs. He was taught to curse his mother, to call her vile names, to repeat accusations of treason and conspiracy. And when he refused, Simon beat him, starved him, kept him in isolation until the boy's spirit broke. Within weeks, Louis Charles was repeating everything they told him to say, including accusations so monstrous, so vile that they would be weaponized against his mother in the most horrifying way possible. Marie Antoinette didn't know the details, but she knew her son was suffering, and there was nothing she could do to save him. That's when they moved her to the conciergerie. On August 1st, 1793, less than a month after they took her son, guards burst into Marionnette's room in the Temple prison at 2 a.m. No explanation, no warning, just an order. You're being transferred. They separated her from her daughter and sister-in-law. She begged to say goodbye. They refused. They dragged her down the tower stairs, threw her in a carriage, and drove her through the dark Paris streets to a place called the Conciergerie. If you know anything about the French Revolution, you know this name. The Conciergerie was called the antechamber to the guillotine. It's where prisoners went in their final days before execution. Marionnette wasn't just being moved, she was being prepared for death. But the revolutionaries wanted to make those final days as psychologically devastating as possible. She was assigned prisoner number 280, not the former queen, not even her name, just a number. Her cell was tiny, about 12 feet by 8 feet. The walls were damp stone covered in mold. There was a thin straw mattress, a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a chamber pot. A single candle for light. No windows, just the suffocating darkness of the medieval dungeon. And here's the truly insidious part. They gave her a privacy screen, a folding screen so she could change clothes or use the chamber pot in privacy. Sounds humane, right? Wrong. The privacy screen was theater because inside that cell at all times were 2 armed guards. They sat in the corner and watched her every single moment. When she ate, when she slept, when she changed her clothes behind that useless screen, when she used the chamber pot, when she prayed, when she cried. Constant, unblinking surveillance. This isn't about security. She was a middle-aged woman in failing health, locked in a dungeon. This was psychological torture designed to strip away her last shred of dignity and privacy. Historical accounts describe how Marionnette tried to maintain her composure. She would sit for hours staring at the wall, her face completely blank. The guards reported that she barely spoke, barely moved, barely ate. But at night, when she thought they couldn't see in the candle light, they heard her crying, whispering her son's name. Louis Charles, Lou is Charles, over and over. She developed severe hemorrhaging, likely uterine cancer or complications from the stress. She bled through her clothes and had to ask the guards for rags, a humiliation she endured in front of men who stared at her without mercy. Her hair, now completely white, started falling out in clumps. She was 37 years old. She looked 60. And then came the trial. October 14, 1793, 8 a.m., Marie Antoinette was dragged from her cell to the Revolutionary Tribunal. This wasn't a trial, it was a performance. The verdict was already decided, but the revolutionaries needed a show, something to justify her execution to the public and to history. The courtroom was packed. Revolutionary officials, journalists, citizens eager to see the former queen humiliated. The prosecutor, a man named Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, prepared to unleash charges of treason, conspiracy, and financial corruption. Marie Antoinette sat in the defendant's chair, pale, gaunt, dressed in widow's black. For 2 days they threw accusations at her, that she conspired with Austria, that she squandered France's treasury, that she planned counter-revolutionary plots. She responded to each charge with startling composure and intelligence. She refuted false claims. She admitted to mistakes without groveling. She refused to be broken. So Fouquier-Tinville played his final, most venomous card. He called a witness Jacques Abert, a radical journalist, and he bare repeated accusations allegedly made by Marie Antoinette's 8-year-old son, Louis Charles. The boy, under coaching from his captives, had claimed that his mother committed incest with him. Let that sink in for a moment. They accused her of sexually abusing her own child using testimony tortured out of an 8-year-old boy in a public courtroom in front of hundreds of people. The room went silent. Even the bloodthirsty mob seemed stunned by the depravity of T. He accusation. Marie Antoinette had remained stoic through every insult, every lie, every threat. But this shattered her. She stood up, her voice, which had been calm, cracked with raw emotion. "I appeal to all the mothers present in this room," she said, her eyes blazing. "Is there among you a single one who would not shudder at such an accusation?" She didn't address the judges. She spoke directly to the women in the crowd, mothers, daughters, sisters. For the first time in the trial, she wasn't defending herself as a queen. She was speaking as a mother whose child had been weaponized against her. Nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge made against a mother, she continued. "I appeal to all mothers who are listening to me." The courtroom erupted. Some women in the crowd who had come to jeer at her execution were moved to tears. Even some of the revolutionary officials shifted uncomfortably. It was too much, too cruel. But Fouquier-Tinville didn't care. He steamrolled through the rest of the trial. At 4 a.m. on October 16th, after a trial lasting less than 2 days with no real evidence, Marie Antoinette was found guilty of high treason and crimes against the state. The sentence, death by guillotine, execution scheduled for later that same day. She was given a few hours in her cell to prepare for death. Back in her cell, with dawn approaching and death only hours away, Marie Antoinette was finally given a pen, paper, and ink. She didn't write a political manifesto. She didn't curse the revolution. She didn't beg for mercy. She wrote a letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, who was still imprisoned in the Temple with Marie Antoinette's daughter. The letter is one of the most heartbreaking documents in history. Let me read you parts of it. "It is to you, sister, that I write for the last time. I have just been condemned, not to a shameful death. That is, only for criminals, but to rejoin your brother, innocent like him. I hope to show the same firmness in my last moments. I am calm as one is when one's conscience reproaches one with nothing. I deeply regret having to abandon my poor children. You know that I lived only for them and for you, my good and tender sister." She went on to forgive her enemies, to ask pardon for any wrongs she had committed, and to beg her sister-in-law to care for her children. "May my son never forget his father's last words, which I expressly repeat to him. Let him never seek to avenge our death." She poured every ounce of her remaining love onto that page. Her final thoughts as a mother, as a sister, as a human being facing the void. The letter filled 4 pages. She signed it simply, Marie Antoinette. Then she handed it to a guard. Here's the devastating truth. The letter was never delivered. Her jailers intercepted it and it vanished into a revolutionary archive. Madame Elizabeth never read it, neither did her daughter. The letter wasn't discovered until decades later, long after everyone Marie Antoinette loved was dead. Her final words to her family died in silence. October 16, 1793, 11 a.m. The executioner's assistant entered Marouinette's cell and ordered her to prepare. Every step was designed to strip away the final remnants of her identity. First, the dress. She was wearing a simple black mourning gown she'd worn since her husband's death. The guard ordered her to remove it and put on a plain white chemise, the uniform of the condemned. She asked to change in private. The guard refused. She had to undress in front of the men who'd been watching her for months. Second, the hair. Her hair, now completely white and brittle, was crudely hacked off with shears. No ceremony, no care, just rough hands and sharp blades, cutting away one of her last physical dignities. Third, the binding. Her hands were tied behind her back with coarse rope, so tight it cut into her wrists. She flinched and said quietly, "You did not bind my husband's hands like this." The guard ignored her. At 11 a.m., she was led out of the conciergerie into blinding daylight. She'd been in that dark cell for 76 days. The sunlight hurt her eyes. She expected a closed carriage, the small mercy her husband had been granted. Instead, there was a rough, open wooden cart called a tumbril, the kind used to transport animal carcasses. She was forced to climb into the cart and sit on a plank, hands bound, exposed to the entirety of Paris. As the cart lurched forward through the streets, thousands of people lined the route, screaming, jeering, spitting, throwing garbage. One man sat at a window sketching furiously Jack Louis David, the revolutionary artist who'd voted for her death. His drawing survives. It shows a thin, hollow-eyed woman sitting rigidly upright, her face a mask of grim dignity as the world howled for her blood. The journey to the plaster revolution took over an hour of public humiliation designed to destroy whatever remained of her spirit. It didn't work. At 12:15 p.m., the cart stopped at the guillotine. The crowd roared. Marie Antoinette climbed the steps of the scaffold without assistance, her legs shaking but her head held high. And then in the final moment of her life, something extraordinary happened. As she walked toward the plank, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. She stopped, turned to him, and spoke her last words. "Pardon me, sir. I did not mean to do it." An apology to the man about to kill her. A bizarre, surreal act of courtesy, the final reflex of a life lived under royal protocol. But it was more than that. It was a choice. In the face of absolute degradation, she chose grace. 20 seconds later, the blade fell. The French Revolution ended to destroy Marie Antoinette, the symbol, the Austrian woman, the wasteful queen, the embodiment of royal excess. They subjected her to unimaginable psychological torture. They weaponized her own child against her. They stripped her of every dignity, every comfort, every shred of privacy. And in the end, they failed, because in their obsession with breaking the queen, they accidentally revealed the human being underneath. A mother who fought like hell for her children. A woman who faced monstrous accusations with courage. A person who, even on the steps of the guillotine, held on to her humanity.